Today, LSD and most hallucinogens are illegal. For decades, millions in the West believed acid and similar drugs could unlock the doors of perception. Then, as one door opened, another closed.
Hallucinogenic plants seem to have always been an important part of human society, going way back to primitive cultures.
How did we go from having the most revered substances of the shamanic world become the most reviled of the modern?
This is a story of the discovery of peyote, magic mushrooms, and beyond. One man's little-known quest to classify the plants of the gods. Before hallucinogens were well known, real-life Indiana Jones, Richard Evans Schultes, searched the Americas for these mind-altering substances. He revolutionized science and spawned another revolution he never imagined. To most, LSD or psychedelics are synonymous with the 1960s and the hippie generation. But mind-altering plants and hallucinogens have been around as long as human beings and may even have sparked the early art and imaginings of our prehistoric ancestors. Had it not been for the scientific investigations of one man, peyote, magic mushrooms, and other sacred plants may have remained hidden in the shadows. Even today, little is known about them. Some scientists feel hallucinogens may hold valuable clues to the workings of our minds. You know, when I was a young student at Harvard, Richard Evans Schultes was sort of a legend on the campus, a man, a kindly professor who shot blowguns in class and had lived mysteriously in the Amazon for years, probably the greatest living explorer of the 20th century. And what really intrigued him, of course, were the curious plants that had first inspired him in his work in Oklahoma, his later work in Mexico, these curious plants that we know as the hallucinogens.
Now, the active intoxicating principle.
In late 1973, I knocked on Schultes' office door. 2 weeks later, I was in the Amazon, living amongst many of the same tribes that Schultes had visited 30 years before. As an anthropologist and botanical explorer, I shared many similar adventures, becoming lost in the forest, fending off strange diseases, and participating in sacred ceremonies. In all my years of exploration, I was always inspired by his example. Whatever he told me to do, I did, whether investigating zombies in Haiti or searching for new hallucinogens in the Amazon rainforest. I later spent years researching and writing his biography, One River. The more I learned about his exploits, the more the man amazed me. Now I'm retracing his route to witness sacred hallucinogenic rites from the American desert to the jungles of the Amazon.
Where the Mississippi River.
In the summer of 1936, a 21-year-old Harvard student left Boston and began one of the longest, strangest trips of the 20th century. His inspiration was a plant. In an obscure German book, Richard Evans Schultes had read of a small hallucinogenic cactus that could induce otherworldly visions. Its name was peyote. He was so amazed he decided to drop everything to study it. He was inspired by his professor, Oakes Ames, director of the Botanical Museum, who encouraged students in his class to sample exotic stimulants and even distilled alcohol during Prohibition years. Ames provided the money to send Schultes 1,400 miles away to Oklahoma to unravel the secrets of peyote use amongst the Kiowa Indians. Peyote grows in the American Southwest and northern Mexico. For 3,000 years, the ancient peoples of Mexico used the cactus as a direct line to God. Then the newly arrived Spaniards banned it in 1521. In the late 1800s, German scientists extracted the active ingredient, the hallucinogen mescaline. Yet even by Schultes' day, few knew of the religious use of peyote amongst Native Americans.
In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were a few non-Indians who were experimenting with it. Americans, some literary people like Weir Mitchell, William James, a philosopher. They were experimenting with peyote and describing the experiences in very interesting ways.
Where the Mississippi River.
Schulte's trip to the Kiowa was a logical choice. The tribe had been visited once before by his new traveling companion, graduate student and anthropologist Weston LeBar. This was to be an extraordinary adventure. They had a beat-up 1928 Studebaker. The trip to Oklahoma lasted days on roads so bad it sometimes took 12 hours to go 100 miles. And there was no guarantee what they'd find at the end of their journey.
And the federal government battled a nation of lawbreakers. The law of the land said it was illegal to drink.
As Schulte set out, a 14-year war against alcohol had just ended in surrender. Prohibition was repealed. But a nation that had demonized rum wasn't ready to legalize a mind-altering cactus.
Well, hallucinogenic drugs are different from other classes of drugs. For starters, hallucinogens are not addictive substances. It's not something you could take every day. It just doesn't work that way ordinarily. I mean, I can't imagine anyone who would want to. It is such a powerful experience. It takes time to integrate it.
It's not the kind of thing you're going to want to do every day. That's the huge difference between LSD, for instance, and heroin. Heroin, you can put everything off forever using heroin. You know, all that really matters is the heroin is being comfortable.
Human beings are born with an innate drive to experience other states of consciousness. Native peoples use psychedelic plants, natural hallucinogens, for very positive purposes. They use them for healing, for contacting spiritual reality, and they do this by using these plants ritually and purposefully.
Like Schulte's, my journey begins at home in the United States. I'm traveling to Navajo country to experience a ritual seldom seen by outsiders.
You know, in the 1930s, most of the world had never even heard of hallucinogenic plants outside of a small little circle of scholars. And that made it all the more incredible that this young kid from Harvard, who had never been west of Boston, decided in the summer of 1936 to travel out to Oklahoma and live amongst the Kiowa and study the ways of the peyote cult.
And it's something that, I've always wanted to witness. I've always wanted to know it. And it's difficult. I mean, you just can't get access to it. And only the Native American Church is allowed to legally use peyote in a sacred context. But fortunately, the Navajos still have this practice, and they've invited me to join the sacred circle within the teepee and witness a remarkable ritual that is the essence of the peyote way.
Yeah, you know, Calvin, I'm extremely grateful that you're having us here, because for me, all my life I've wanted to witness and participate in a peyote ceremony, all my life.
Why?
And, well, because my great hero, the man who taught me everything...
Who is that?
His name was Professor Richard Evans Schultes. I've read everything he ever wrote about it, and yet I've never had the opportunity to witness it. So this is a very important thing. Extremely grateful that you've made this possible.
So you haven't gone to the peyote yet?
No.
Not yet?
No.
Wood, lots of it, is needed to keep two fires going, one for the peyote ceremony later in the evening, the other for the sweat lodge. Across North America, sweats are a vital part of Indian life. Rocks are heated in a fire, and later, water will create the steam. The ritual is said to purify the individual, both physically and spiritually. And in the case of the peyote way, it prepares you for the intensity of the sacred ceremony.
We learn something in the sweat lodge too. We don't just go in there. We talk about, we teach our young generation.
Calvin Sosi is a revered elder of the Peyote Church. He's called a roadman because he guides believers down a road of righteousness, away from such vices as alcohol. The cactus is the vehicle. Richard Schultes learned about peyote from a legendary roadman, Bello Kozat, who was born at a time when buffalo still covered the plains.
When we go into the sweat, it's like going into Mother Earth. You're going into the mother's womb. Things that hurt a person, it's all inside of us, so we go in there to clean that out of us. And then when we go into ceremony, we're clean. We can still pray, and then that's when the medicine works.
It's a little bit like entering an oven, and once you're inside, it's pitch black. But then the songs begin, preparing you for the long night of peyote rituals ahead.
It's always said that temperatures in these traditional sweats can get so intense that if you don't sing, if you're not involved in the chants, you can get overwhelmed.
Sweat lodge ceremonies are sacred, and Calvin doesn't want any cameras inside.
It feels like you've had this sort of, it's great because you feel like you've had a bath and a shower by like a thundercloud or something, it's like this warm rain that's come pouring down all over you, which is your own sweat. And it's funny, the juniper that came from my garden.
In 1936, Schultes experienced these rituals too, but it took time. When he first arrived, the Kiowa were cautious. They had suffered in the past for practicing their sacred ways. And now Labar was back with a stranger who wanted to understand their most solemn ceremony.
This is my colleague, Richard Schultes.
By respecting their traditions, Schultes earned the Kiowa's trust. With no hesitation, he swallowed the bitter, sacred medicine up to 4 times a week. Schultes found the kaleidoscopic colors astonishing. But even he could not escape the nauseating side effects of the cactus, seen as an essential part of the ritual. By taking the cactus, Schultes established a precedent he would follow for the rest of his career. He refused to be the clinical scientist, outside looking in. He immersed himself in native culture to learn secrets denied to outsiders.
I think from the moment that I saw him, I was fascinated by him. He had an amazing fund of knowledge. He was just an interesting person, somebody I wanted to know. I think underneath, my sense is that he was quite a wild person. I'm tempted to even say a proto-hippie who back in that era, there was really no social support for that kind of thing.
Schultes' research came at just the right time. There were still a few elders left of the very generation that had first created the Peyote way. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a chance to do something I've wanted to do ever since meeting Schultes: participate in a traditional peyote ceremony. For him, that summer in Oklahoma was just the beginning of a life of exploration. He would discover sacred plants and hallucinogens so powerful, it would change a generation. Plant explorer Richard Evan Schultes was a real-life Indiana Jones whose discovery of hallucinogenic plants laid the foundation for the psychedelic 60s. His adventure began in Oklahoma in 1936, working with the Kiowa Indians to unravel the mysteries of the Peyote way. For years, I studied with Schultes. Now, I'm retracing his journey, starting here at a rarely witnessed peyote ceremony, just being prepared. Peyote ceremonies are a blend of Native American and Christian beliefs. a half-moon altar is prepared, and later, glowing coals in the shape of a mythical thunderbird.
So this is a crescent altar, which once it's formed in the shape, becomes a symbol of the Peyote Road, which is a path of righteousness you must walk. And then the fire will be here, dead center, and eventually the ashes, you can almost see how the ashes will be formed into the shape of the thunderbird.
No Navajo celebration would be complete without a mutton feast. The peyote ceremony is no different. This sheep will be cooked for the next day's meal.
There's just something so wonderfully ordinary about life with all people, all times. It's just like the peyote cult. I mean, it's not, it's just so much backdrop of people's lives here. It's what you do to be well.
Here, peyote is sacred. It's never taken just to get high. In fact, tribal members trying to kick a drug habit will actually turn to peyote.
This is our traditional thing to do. But if they want help out there and they take their drugs and then if they want to get out of it, so they would come into the peyote meeting and they'll get a cure for it, If
they want to stop using drugs or alcohol, they can come in the meeting.
So in a way, you don't even think of this as a drug. This is a medicine. It's used to treat.
It's just helping you out, clearing your mind out.
I've spent 7 years studying amongst Navajo Native Americans and other Native Americans their use of peyote, and I just completed a neuroscience study of close to 200 people in the final published study. The results show that these people are healthy.
The ritual is protected federally by an act of Congress, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, passed in 1994. Yet not all state laws conform with the federal mandate, creating confusion. So Native American church members are sometimes arrested when transporting their legal sacrament across state lines. In the 16th century, the Spanish banned peyote use, even killing Aztec priests. Yet it continued to flourish amongst the Indians of Mexico. Not until the late 1800s did the ritual start to spread to the tribes of the United States. The man who started it all was a Comanche chief of mixed blood named Quanah Parker. In 1884, badly wounded in battle, Parker received peyote to heal his wound. Then, while in a trance, Parker said Christ appeared to him and gave him a message to spread the peyote faith. It was Parker who created the half-moon altar, with peyote at the center, as a new kind of sacrament.
But its power grew out of the fact that as the traditional ways declined, as the buffalo were reduced to a shadow on the prairie, as the wisdom of the elders became just a memory, as the Sundance was forbidden, and as all the ritual practices which had made this extraordinary culture of the plains so majestic, when all that was lost, here was something that offered a new promise of hope, a vision of God, a new possibility for life itself.
Yet despite the efforts of Quanah Parker, the peyote ceremony remained illegal. The man who helped legalize the peyote way was a pioneering anthropologist named James Mooney.
This fellow James Mooney came along and encouraged the Cheyenne Arapaho Nation to incorporate as a church. We call it the Peyote Church, the Native American Church. This is a peyote way. This is a native traditional way. But this word church, to please the white missionaries, and it stuck. When Schultes came to the Kiowa, greater white America either didn't know about peyote or they were hostile to it. And so the Americans that were in charge of reservations were trying to stamp it out. It was very much hidden, but it was also illegal.
The Native American Church was formally incorporated in 1918, with some 20,000 members spread across several states. But government opposition continued for decades. Schultes' first peyote ceremony was a revelation. The cactus was used here as a healing tool, a kind of communion wafer to bring participants closer to God. The peyote ceremony begins as it did in Schulte's day, with the words of a tribal member who is suffering. The patient, Karen, has survived a whole range of abuse. She has come to be healed. It's just what people do to stay well. It's what they do to make sense out of sensation, to heal themselves when they're ill, to rebalance their energy and their spirits when they feel low.
No, we can sing.
The crown of the peyote cactus is cut off and dried. The plant is extremely bitter. Some users manage to chew it. Calvin has ground it up and also prepared a tea to make it easier to take.
Then we'll go ahead and eat some medicine. But us that we can't force nobody.
Throughout the ceremony, the participants use the peyote as a sacrament. They take as much or as little as they desire. What they must do is revere the plant. At times, the people will take small, symbolic amounts, so little that the plant has no physical effect. But when deemed necessary for healing, the roadman and the participants will consume enough to induce a powerful psychoactive experience. But that experience, as Schultes discovered, does have side effects. Beyond the powerful visions and euphoria, compounds in the cactus often induce nausea and vomiting. The roadmen believe this is the medicine's way of purging illness from the patient. As dawn breaks, the peyote starts to wear off. Calvin closes the ceremony as roadmen did in Schulte's time, with the sacred eagle fan, a final brushing off of sorrow and pain. In the early morning, the teepee comes down. Every sign of the ceremony is swept away. The final act is the cutting of the cord that ties the teepee poles together. Symbolically, and perhaps tangibly, Karen's sorrows will disappear.
It's got to work from teaching people to really understand what they're doing to their bodies and the sanctity and the holiness of their body and to protect it. And once people have an appreciation of that, maybe it's not so bizarre then for a Navajo elder to suggest to a grandson to come with him to pray to God, to their creator, with their sacrament, which they call medicine with a capital M. And that medicine, today, it's still peyote for them.
You know, that summer in Oklahoma really changed Schulte's life. He went back east, and not long after, he went down to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and he testified at Congress in favor of the rights of Native American people to use peyote in traditional context. And while he was there, he was doing some research at the Smithsonian, and he came upon a letter that provided a clue that would allow him in time to solve one of the really great mysteries in the whole history of botany.
And Schulte's solving of that puzzle would unwittingly usher in a whole new era, a time when lifestyle and culture merge with religion and politics, a revolution that continues to affect us to this day. While in Washington, D.C. in 1937, botanist Richard Evans Schultes came across an astonishing letter in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution. In the letter, a Mexican doctor, Blas Pablo Rico, made a passing reference to a long-lost hallucinogen, Tehuacatl, flesh of the gods, used by Aztec priests to commune with their creator. Pinned to a peyote specimen, Reiko's letter stated that Tehuantocotl was not peyote, as commonly believed, but was a mushroom still used by Indians in the mountains of Oaxaca. Schultes believed Reiko and then convinced his Professor Ames to fund his journey to Mexico to search for the true identity of the Aztec plant. I've come down here to follow the trail of the mystery. The letter from Reiko really was the key to the puzzle, because it suggested not only that Tehuantocotl really was a mushroom, but that the mushrooms were still being used in ceremonies in remote reaches of Mexico. Schultes contacted Reiko, who sent him samples of the mushrooms in 1937, but the specimens arrived in such terrible shape that they couldn't be scientifically identified. So Schultes decided himself to travel to Mexico, really with the goal of finding the mushrooms growing if they existed, so that he'd be able to collect proper specimens that would allow him to identify at last this mysterious sacred plant of the Aztec. So he came south by Greyhound bus to Mexico, met up with Reiko, and they traveled by train south into the mountains of Oaxaca, and eventually by horseback to reach the small Mazatec community of Huatla. We're leaving Oaxaca City by road, traveling 200 miles inland to Huautla, where curanderas, female shaman, still practice their sacred rites, transporting patients into supernatural realms using magic mushrooms, a term that in 1938 had not been invented yet. It's hard when you come into a country as we did to realize and imagine what it was like in the time of Schultes. He had to take a broken down railroad south from Mexico City, get off at a random railhead in some small town, hire a mule, and come up 14, 15 hours overland to get to a very small village nestled in the mountains in the mist. What he found was a unique cultural universe, which was the Mazatec world. The Mazatec Indians live throughout the mountains of Oaxaca. Huautla de Jimenez is one of their larger towns. You know, it's both strange and wonderful to be here in Huautla, and I have such an image of the place in my head from all the photographs that Schultes took. It's incredible to think about him in 1938. He came up this very street, then it was just a simple cobblestone track flanked by Mazatec homes on either side. And to his astonishment, he discovered that his companion, Reiko, who had first turned him on to the idea of these curious mushrooms, was an ardent Nazi sympathizer. Now, this is a year before Europe is about to drop into the Second World War. And to make things even more incredible, there was another team of scholars led by Bernard Bevan and Robert Wheatlander, and it turned out that Bevan, at least by rumor, was British Secret Service. So you had this scenario right out of Indiana Jones of these two teams of scholars converging on this small Mazatec village in search of the mystery of the sacred mushrooms. So with Reiko's help, Schultes searched the village for people who might know of this hallucinogenic mushroom. He needed a complete specimen to scientifically classify this living flesh of the gods. I'm trying to track down a well-known curandera with the hope she'll let me witness the shamanic mushroom ceremony. ¿La señora es por allá? The shamanic path is not for everybody. It's the individual who is touched by the divine, who has a special calling, who is the one who becomes the intermediary between the realm of the mundane, the realm of the ordinary, and the realm of the spirits. Like all curanderas, Inés calls the mushrooms the little gods. Inés said that when I asked her what was the significance of the mushrooms, she said that, we call them the little gods for a reason, that they in fact are, in a sense, little gods of the Mazatec. Even though they are hallucinogenic, they are in no way a drug. They are something that's used to cure, and to cure not only
problems of the body, but any kind of problem. The mushroom itself is a vehicle to another realm where good things can happen.
Ines is taking me on a hunt for the little gods. The Mazatec idea of the mushrooms is a total fusion of pre-Columbian ideas and Catholic ideas. The belief isn't that the mushrooms simply grow from the ground. They only grow where the blood of Christ fell onto the ground or where the saliva of Christ fell onto the ground. You know, Schultes used to say that the missionaries complained to him about how difficult it was to explain to the Mazatec what Holy Communion was, because the Mazatec would say, we already do that. We already eat the body of Christ. So when you took the mushrooms, you were engaged and taken into your body not only sort of the Mazatec tradition, but also quite literally the body of Christ. In 1938, Schultes and Reiko spent weeks searching for the identity of the Mazatec mushroom. Meanwhile, Robert Wheatlander and the other team of scholars sat in on one of the secret ceremonies and reported a special mushroom being consumed, but an actual specimen eluded both parties. Word was put out to locals, and one day, an Indian showed up with a selection of freshly picked mushrooms. Schultes recognized one of them from Reiko's earlier dried specimens. This was it, Tehuanacatl, the flesh of the gods. Schultes was the first to collect a voucher specimen of this hallucinogen and scientifically identify it. 15 years later, inspired by Schultes' work, an investment banker and vice president of J.P. Morgan would venture down here. What he found would start a revolution. High in the mountains of Oaxaca in 1938, Richard Evans Schultes had identified an ancient Aztec hallucinogen. Tehuanacatl, the flesh of the gods, turned out indeed to be a mushroom. What's more, it was still being used in secret ceremonies by contemporary Indians. The hallucinogen was traditionally eaten at royal Aztec feasts, sometimes following human sacrifice. Priests also used them to diagnose illness. Banned for centuries by the Spanish, Tehuanacatl rituals went underground, only to re-emerge as a combination of Christian and pre-Columbian beliefs. Schultes always said that if you were to know the ways of the shaman, you had to participate in all of their rituals. Tonight, I'll take part in a ceremony seldom experienced by outsiders, a journey inside the mind, guided by Ines, a remarkable healer. Years ago, she witnessed a mushroom ceremony for an Englishman. His name was John Lennon. One of these boys suffers from unexplained pain. His mother has brought him here to be doctored. Both Ines and the boy will take the mushrooms. Like the ancient Aztec, the curandera believes that the mushrooms allow her to diagnose illness. First, all the participants are purified with incense and medicinal leaves.
The fascinating thing about the ceremony is just the symbolism of it all. You know, the lights, the purity, the flowers, the smoke, the copal, taking the prayers to heaven.
Now, the journey really begins. Ines sings to help guide participants on their journey.
She has learned her art of healing, her art of ritual, not from a book, not even from another person or another curandera, but actually from the mushroom itself. The mushroom is the teacher.
Ines applies a final symbolic dusting of sacred tobacco powder to protect me during the ceremony. For as long as people have taken the mushrooms, they have reported profound sensations. Some feel the presence of God, others feel reborn. The mushroom's active ingredient is psilocybin, a substance similar to chemicals that control